Welcome back. Welcome back to the Detroit is Different podcast studios. And in studio is somebody else that do a lot of what's happening here, but from a different lens, where it's actually installations. You can reach out and touch it along so many different stories of legacy Black Detroit, specifically one of the most legacy Black Detroit neighborhoods and much more that pours into it. I'm talking about Black Bottom. You heard about it. You should know about it. If you talk to any Black people about, hey, where were Black people at when they was moving and grooving in and around Detroit at the start? Where was the culture at? Where was the center? So much about it. And it's great to see it archived for now 10 years, 10-year anniversary. Black Bottom Archives. Marcia, how are you today?
What up, though? I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Definitely. So, definitely glad to have you in studio. This has been taking some time where it's like, let me throw some dates, and then let's throw some dates. But as they always say, perfect timing.
Yes.
Sometimes seems like it take forever.
Right. Exactly.
But it is what it is.
It is what it is.
All right. So, within this project, I'm sure we're going to talk a whole lot about that. But definitely classic Detroit is different. You and your peoples. How many generations deep are y'all to Detroit?
Yeah. So for me, my story goes to my great grandmother on my maternal side. My paternal side is from Alabama, and my mom's side is from Mississippi. So my great grandmother migrated up north with her sisters, one of which went to Chicago, and the other two came to Detroit. And yeah, she landed in Ferry Park and had my grandma along with 6 other sisters and a brother. So she was like a single mom of 7 girls.
Wow.
6 girls and 1 boy. And she was Catholic. So, she also had to deal with the scrutiny of being a single mother. But she was able to make it do what it do. And she, worked different jobs and, used what she had on hand to provide for my aunts and my uncle.
So
And, yeah.
I definitely got to start with Mississippi. The roots usually always go to Chicago or Memphis. Or St. Louis, because it's a little further west. And you do have fam that did go there. What brought them to Detroit, the other 2 sisters?
I'm not 100% sure what brought them to Detroit. I think some of it was the Catholic connection, maybe, that she was looking for, because that wasn't necessarily something that had really been in our family before her generation. So I'm not 100%. So I think our family has a lot of that, secrets in the family where you're not always going to be able to get that information because of that culture of, you're a kid, stay in the kid's place. This isn't information for you to have. And that was true, I think, for my great-grandmother a lot. So for our family, it's been a lot of having to re-piece together things by talking to other people, that were around her. So.
Okay. All right. And then you say, Catholic church, any church, I would say, definitely at that time being what would be considered a single mother with children. Just how society is today, but definitely back then, would look at women without being married, just having children. It was definitely shunned. It was definitely shunned, not as welcome. What church did they go to?
I want to say St. Mary's, but I cannot say 100%.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now let's go to your grandmother. And you say Ferry Park neighborhood, and definitely a lot of sisters, 1 brother. God knows. God bless that brother. God bless that brother. I know he was fighting for bathroom time and all of that good stuff. But your grandmother, did she stay in that Ferry Park neighborhood?
So she grew up there, and eventually she made her way further west through relationships and marriage. And so now she lives like northwest side of Detroit. But yeah, she grew up there with her sisters. She did take me on like a tour at my request to just show me some of the places that were important to her when she was growing up. And one of those places being Duffield Public Library. So I got to go in there. And it's interesting to see, like, time passes, but you go into places and you feel like you're kind of walking back into the past. So yeah,
Okay. All right. And now I guess let's go into your story. Your parents in neighborhood. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up also on the northwest side of Detroit, which is, where my mom grew up as well. But I also was a military kid. So my mom was a single mother. And so when I was a child, she joined the military. And so I stayed with my grandma up until I was around 3 or so, and moved back and forth with my mom to Florida, where she was at the bases. And then I would come back for the summer with my grandparents. 9/11 happened, and so I moved back to Detroit for a few years to be with my grandma who taught at DPS. And so I was, in school with her before the kids was in school, with her after the kids was in school, in the teacher's lounge. And I got to do that for a good 2-3 years. I was at Coolidge Elementary at the time, which isn't active anymore. But yeah, for me, it's been a back and forth experience of like coming home to Detroit and then leaving and going to another place. A lot of those places be in the South. So I attended high school in Jacksonville, Florida, which is like Northeast Florida and like not too far from Georgia. So I have a lot of that, the South also kind of shaped my life experience and the way that I view the world.
Duval County.
Duval, yeah.
All right. So, and I got family in Duval County too.
Oh, okay.
With that being said, just in this back and forth, what branch of the military?
Navy.
Okay. So, on the shores. And just being in the Navy, and that kind of had you grow up as what they call it, like a grandparent's kid.
Yes.
Okay.
But also just the village. Like my aunts, my mom has 3 sisters, 2 of which, live in Detroit, have lived in Detroit. And so also getting to spend time with my aunties and great aunts and cousins, like everybody, a lot of our family still lives in Detroit or just like in the surrounding metro area. So everybody had a little hand in raising me when I was a kid, luckily.
That's cool. I mean, I'm almost like a grandparent's kid, though my parents was here, but as they were growing the business, I spent so much time with my grandma. And grandparents' kids know, like you have like different tastes and sensibilities and music and, like, I mean, almost every day, like Bold and the Beautiful and Young and the Restless and stuff like that in the summertime.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm about to watch my stories. You just pick up, watch an Empty Nest, and it's just like
110%, absolutely. Yes. Yep.
Your 4-year-old watching.
Even my decor, like my decor for my house right now is my grandma's house because it's just it's so classic. It's so nostalgic. It just makes me feel so good.
All right, share some of what you got where I know other people may notice, like, that's interesting. What you got in the crib?
I got the mantle set up with the photos, with the family photos. I have the, gold, bronze pieces, just kind of around. I got the little chandelier light, with the crystals around it. I got some iconic Black art on the wall. So, it's like, it's a little, Black art aesthetic, but then also the family. And then you got the warm rugs and the blankets around.
Okay. Do you have the and this was like a thing in the 90s, the figurine pieces?
So I'm trying to find one on Facebook Marketplace right now. I'm looking for the Panther, the Black Panther one.
Yeah.
That's the one I'm looking for, and I haven't found it yet. But
okay. It was like I don't know what was going on like in the 90s or like late 80s. It was like you went over people's houses and it was just like figurine sets was like, what would I say? Like the deacons and the deaconesses and the nurses' aide and churches was just swapping them like trading cards or something.
Yes, my grandma actually got one. She got one of a white Jesus figurine, and then she painted him black.
Okay.
Because she was, she was like, I love this design. This is beautiful, but also I needed to be representative of my perspective.
Okay, an elementary school teacher too.
Yeah, for like 30 years.
Wow.
And yeah, before she was a teacher, she also worked on computers with IBM. And she also owned her own beauty salon in her basement for a period of time. So she's very much of an entrepreneur and has had different versions of herself throughout her life. She was a reverend. She's still a reverend, even though she's like not actively attached to any church. But yeah, my grandma's been a lot of things.
Okay. All right. It sounds like I already can feel some of them stories. Some of them stories. All right. So you also talk about this connection to Duval and Jacksonville and just that lens. And you talk about like just the proximity. So if people know, especially, okay, down south. So we're talking Florida South. Florida's, as they always have like the Florida man jokes and stuff like that. Florida's almost like 5 different worlds. You got Southern Florida. Then you got Miami, because I separate them. Then you got Central Florida. Then you got Northern Florida. And then you got Jacksonville. All of it is just, like during the pandemic, people were like, is all this stuff happening in Jacksonville? I'm like, Duval County is some interesting stuff going on down there. It's one of those places where it's commonplace where you'll see someone walking the alligator like it's a dog to the store. And I'm a kid and I see that and I'm like, what's going on here? Share a little bit of what it was like when you touched down there with your Detroit in you.
Yeah. What's so funny that because I was going back and forth to stay with my grandparents every summer, I had a lot of Detroit pride. And there was a lot of, bad boys memorabilia circulating all the time. So I had built up a wardrobe of Detroit t-shirts that I was wearing when I first moved back. So I had always just like made it known to people like, I'm from Detroit. And people have their own perspectives of Detroit wherever we go. And so that was interesting. But when I first moved to Duval, I moved to the west side, which is more of a predominantly Black part of Jacksonville. And went to school. When I tell people that I lived in Florida, people often assume that I lived around a lot of white people. And there was a point in time where, because of the school I was attending, I was around a lot of white people. But Jacksonville, Florida is a very diverse place. And so I was able to still just experience a different type of Blackness is what I felt like for me. So like having my experience of like the candy lady and going and getting a hot pickle and, going and getting like just some of the other things that were very Southern in a way in terms of like the types of snacks, like the types of snacks that kids reach for is not the same across the country. And so the snacks that I was eating was like sunflower seeds and like everything was red hot. Everything was pickled. And so, yeah, it was just, for me, it was just getting another experience of Blackness. Eventually there was a point where I went to more of a suburban school and that gave me a totally different perspective of what it was like, really getting that tale of two cities sort of perspective. Like Obama got into office when I was in high school, and my high school was one of the high schools that had a bomb threat and we had to shut the school down. And so, yeah, that was a moment when I really got to get really intimate around racism in a way, coming back and forth to what is still a predominantly Black city. I wasn't having to experience those sorts of conflicts when I was in school or, the people I was around. But, being in that sort of environment, I was like, oh my God, I want to come back home. So.
Yeah, definitely. You talk about snacks like Kool-Aid pickles, only a Southern thing. You like Kool-Aid pickles? It's like, they doing it, man. They are doing it. So you come back after that. You're like, okay, I got to get back to the D. And where are you at after high school? Where do you go to school? What's your thought process other than getting back to the D?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, I had so many different. I've wanted to be a lot of different things throughout my life. A veterinarian, a chef, all these different things. But by the time I got to, I was starting to get politicized like a lot of other folks were around Trayvon Martin's death, for instance, happened while I was in high school.
And in Florida, too.
So, that was like very intimate for me. And so I was, thinking about how I wanted to have an impact and how I wanted to show up in that moment. And I didn't feel like I had those opportunities in Jacksonville because even though it is diverse, it is still a predominantly white space in the South. And so I didn't know how to find my people at that point. So coming back home felt like a way for me to have a better chance of connecting with folks that were thinking about the things I was thinking about. I was starting to get into this idea of being a social worker, which brought me into looking at Marygrove College as a possibility. My aunt worked there at the time, like leading the study abroad trips and things like that while she was there. So I was able to come back and attend Marygrove for free with some scholarships and her
Wow.
support. And I was a social work major for the first year. And then I changed to sociology and political science. And while I was there, I got my first hand at organizing. I do want to give credit to East Michigan Environmental Action Council, EMEAC, which is where I first started learning about organizing, ever got introduced to the concept of organizing, was coming there. I moved back to Detroit in 2013. So when I first moved back, it was during the summer. They had a program called Young Educators Alliance. It was an environmental justice program. Everybody was pretty much, between the ages of 15 to I had just turned 19. And yeah, we were doing door knocking around the incinerator when that was still actively a campaign, got to really set the foundation of meeting a lot of the Detroit organizers who I still admire today. And I feel really lucky to have that as being my starting pad, because whenever I feel, I need to be reminded of, where I come from and what my values are, that is always a place that kind of roots me in my work. So, yeah, that in addition to Marygrove are things that were happening in my early years when I first moved back to Detroit.
So I first want to, you came at so much where I want to unpack a little bit more. So first, your aunt at Marygrove, who your aunt is. That's one.
Michelle Cade.
Okay, shout out, Auntie Michelle Cade. So Aunt Michelle got you into Marygrove. Marygrove is one of the institutions that's been spoke about here as a Catholic college or institution of higher education. You had UAD and you had Marygrove, and Marygrove and the sisters there and their work for years as a college was something that provided from, I think, a liberal arts lens, whether that be teachers, social workers, and definitely as you talk about in the studies of urban planning and urban organization, a lot of people have come through that institution and what it has provided for Detroit and their stances. My family themselves. So Dr. Myra Reynolds at DSA, that's Marygrove. My cousin Vicky Hooks, Vicky Green, you all would know her as Vicky Green more so, as the teacher from Cass, another Marygrove, and then also my cousin Mary Reynolds, another Marygrove, and so many others have touched, Von Arrington. The list goes on of people talking about that Marygrove class situation that was a place where you could challenge a lot of the sisters there and the other professors. And learn a lot. What was your Marygrove experience? As Marygrove right now is not an institution of higher education, but what was your experience at Marygrove like?
Yeah, I am so happy. There was a piece of me as a young person at that time who was grieving a little bit of what I knew I was going to be missing by coming back home and choosing to attend a smaller college. And this idea of just some of the stereotypes of college of being just this. I knew I was going to college for a different reason, and it wasn't necessarily to socialize or explore in that way. I was coming with I was coming with an agenda, and I knew that I wanted to figure out how I could be of service to people, how I could push back against the things that I was witnessing, and Marygrove was the perfect place to do that. They have the values written on the wall, and you don't necessarily take those things as radical things at that point. But even looking at some of the values that they, talked about holding just explicitly, and what it would mean for them to do that in 2025, or how would Marygrove be responding to what's happening right now with the attack on DEI. But all that to say, Marygrove was a really radical place to me, that I don't think folks, outside looking in would necessarily assume for what is a Catholic institution. But I was mentored by a lot of, amazing folks that I keep coming in contact with. You mentioned like urban planning, like the Institute of Detroit Studies was at Marygrove, led by Dr. Frank Rashid, who was one of my professors, Dr. Tom Klug, who was one of my professors, Dr. Ivory, who was everybody's political science professor, because the one thing at Marygrove is like the departments were really a person or two people. So, at some point when I did apply to attend a bigger college, I'm talking to people who had 5 different sociology professors, and I had one sociology professor, Dr. Burns, one political science professor, Dr. Ivory, and there were maybe a couple people, but all that to say, it was a very intimate experience, and so I was able to build relationships with the professors and with students that I still have today that have like reconfigured into all different types of relationships. But yeah, Marygrove laid a good foundation for me in terms of just understanding the importance of having community, and that community doesn't always look like folks that are related by blood.
Are you attending? I'm guessing you're in the Dr. Fike era, not the Dr. Price era, when you're at
Yes.
Marygrove
Yep.
too.
Dr. Fike.
And
Yep.
Dr. Fike in leadership at Marygrove, it comes in with a focus on leadership and the way that we can change society with shaping a lot of young leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely remember that. I mean, I have the perspective of a student.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know that I was, as in tune with like his philosophies and like how he was using his philosophies to shape my experience as a student. I don't think I necessarily made that connection. I will say, again, some of my early organizing experiences happened at Marygrove. And I remember, I don't know if there was a Black student union, and I think there was a student government. It was so small that it was like anybody could start a club. Mm-hmm. And so I had started a club. I can't remember what exactly, but I remember I had started talking to my classmates and like asking them, what they would like to see different, because I was seeing little things that was, like you have company, you come over and you put out your best china, and then the company leaves, and then you kind of just don't necessarily have that same effort for the people who are there. Mm-hmm. And so there were some things that I was noticing that was making me feel that way. And so I started talking to my classmates. And so we put together a list of demands. And I remember sitting with him and, telling him like, these are the things we need as students. And so even all that to say, like, there were moments where I experienced him as more of not necessarily an opponent, but somebody that I kind of had to like be in struggle with a little bit. Mm-hmm. But then also somebody who, I was able to do, direct action and do demonstrations and have open conversations about socialism and communism and Black Lives Matter, and the university be open to that. So it was never to say that was an experience, but I guess I'm just kind of like adding layer to like, what my perspective was as a student. And
oh yeah, I definitely know that I met him more so from the outside in on doing some organizing with, I believe it was Leslie Jackson that was there too. But don't get me the drifting and everything. But I do remember that thought process. And yeah, it was just interesting hearing his perspective of coming into a Catholic institution that has such a history about what he thought young leadership would look like. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think it was clear that is what they were hoping to do. Mm-hmm. And that's what they were looking to do. Like the people that I'm still in relationship with who also graduated from Marygrove, I think a lot of the issues that we had with Marygrove would have been solved with more resources. And I think that's true for many things, many institutions that we have critiques of. Is like a lot of this is making the best of what you have because of resource scarcity.
And I love you uplift that, as I often, speak to most of life being an equation, as I say, and it's back to capacity. And within that capacity, when you're working with others, when is it the right time to be so transparent about it? Some say all the time. Some say possibly not. and I'm not one to make the determination depending upon how you organize, but I definitely feel as though Marygrove not being open really has impacted that community, because it was one of those institutions that not only offer students opportunities, but I clearly see, people such as you and myself, doing some adjunct, classes and organizing and spaces. And there's still things that happen in the space. Shout out to Nina and everything that Nina Payne and them are doing with the events team and the vision of what's moving forward with the community. But it's still, I just know what was produced.
Mm-hmm.
And, just because it was doesn't mean it'll last forever.
Yeah.
So shifting, EMEAC, you organizing with EMEAC and EJ space, which the environmental justice is interesting. But what was your take on environmental justice and organizing community grassroots door-to-door campaign? What was that like?
So, I mentioned like a part of what drew me back to Detroit was, the murder of Trayvon Martin, the organizing that was sparked, just seeing young people be active. I wanted to find a way to be in that. And so when I found out about EMEAC, it didn't necessarily fit that in that way. But for me, I saw an opportunity to just be in community with other young Black people who were thinking about what I was thinking about. And to learn about something that, I've always been a person to kind of see the connectedness of issues. So like the environment, I'm like, I care about the environment. I don't like to litter. So, let me see what environmental justice is about.
Mm-hmm.
And mind you, this is me coming from, 4 years of, at this point, my mom being a single mom was able to create some economic stability for me that brought me into more white spaces, which usually happens as a result. Like that's, what people are often working towards or feel like, will bring you success. So I was starting to have more experiences in those spaces that I think started to alienate me from some truths, because oftentimes we're taught like this is law, and so that law happens because it's written down and nobody lies, and like if somebody does mess up, there's an accountability system. But coming back into EMEAC, like there's a radical politic here, and so I was always confronting people, kind of reminding me that these systems are not real. Like looking to the judicial system, like so. All that to say, I was thinking I was coming to learn about environmental justice, and I learned about pretty much every other radical movement just by being in that space. I learned about, international organizing. I learned about, feminist organizing. I learned about, economic transit. Environmental justice became my entry point to learn about just social movements overall.
And environmental justice, like so many other movements of justice, starts in the Black community.
Exactly.
Also, it's like many other institutions in America, it's reflective of America. As I always uplift this, America is going to be predatory, extractive, and destructive. So even inside the lens of environmental justice, working with solidarity, the racism and bigotry is just so evident. Hence, I think more of a clear perspective of this is, you see 4 trees that need some support, and then you see a family of 4 Black people.
Right.
It's going to be more resources and advocacy given to the trees than the Black people.
Right.
And you'll get argument after argument after argument with people that say that they align themselves with nature and they care about humanity and they care about the cause. But then it's like, but you don't care about these Black people.
Right.
And it becomes more evident and evident. The challenge with environmental justice, like a lot of other movements, and I think that it echoes, and this is a Kari opinion here, okay? So put this on me, not on Marcia. But this is the challenge in environmental justice. The social determinants of health, as they call it, are all of the factors that create horrific qualities of life for the Black community, echo in everything in life. So that means that when environmental justice now has a call to action to say that this is messed up because water's messed up, what community are they going to go to? When they say this is messed up because the air quality is messed up, what community are they going to go to? When they say this is messed up because the soil is messed up, what community are they going to go to? The the as they say, the denominator in all of these factors these are black communities. Mm-hmm. Black communities. Black communities. And many other justice movements do the same thing. And this is oftentimes what I raise up, and that could be like in whether that be in youth movements, or whether that be in LGBTQIA plus movements, or whether that be in feminist movements, or whether that be in home ownership movements. Like, if you want to have a call to action about justice, you're usually going to take black faces and put them in the mix, because they're going to be the most I guess I would say tragic story to display whatever's going on. And then that black face that is the face of the environmental justice, that's the harm. The minute that the resources are there connected to whoever this black person's story comes and everything's ready, that black person now goes into a back room and says, well, you don't really have the resources to know how to make decisions on what should be done for your community. So we're going to put you in the back and we're going to decide for you. All these people that just propped you up to be the face of something that's so tragic now have exploited you. And that becomes so ever clear the more and more I look at not just the environmental justice movement, but so many movements, but the environmental justice movement, it really hits you in the chest. Because oftentimes I'm seeing those presenting themselves as allies. And when I speak of black and white, I'm not necessarily just speaking to skin, because I'm talking to culture too, because it's a lot of black, they say all skin folk ain't kin folk, well, which it's an ideology. It's like, do you recognize that it's about empowering the people, and are you aligned with the people? And a lot of these people in these spaces that talk about justice are never aligned with the people. They're more concerned with places and systems than they're concerned with people. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think because EMEAC and, the radical work that was taking place there was my first introduction to environmental justice, to see it be practiced in any other way that didn't center, Black people as those who are most impacted, but those who are also most resourced to figure out a way to make this better. Seeing it done any other way was very confusing to me. So I do remember having those experiences as a young organizer, looking to branch out and create relationships with other organizations, all that are not focused in Detroit, but, the air, the water, everything is, we're all responsible, we're all impacted. So there's
Captain
power,
Planet.
So I do remember having those moments where I could tell that, there was a way that they wanted to use Black people as props, or, to have them be tokenized. But, because I was aware that there was a movement that was Black-led, that was led by the folks who were impacted, but also the folks who were invested in the community that they're organizing for, I was able to find a lot of resource in environmental justice. And it just, it spurred me off into other realms of organizing that I wasn't necessarily aware of. And so it was like, through that journey of doing that, I got into electoral organizing work. I was doing vote mob stuff that was happening around, I can't remember which election it was. And then eventually I started organizing with Black Youth Project 100, and we started a chapter in 2015.
Okay. All right. 2015, Black Youth Chapter. Now, all of this is going on in organizing. College Mind. What's your mom? What's your grandma? What is everybody, your friends and family saying? Like, wow, you are taking on the system. What's their perspective?
Yeah, I was that young person that was very loud and proud about my opinions. I was, chopped off my hair. That was a whole moment for my mom and my grandma. Like, oh my goodness, what is she doing? But, choosing to wear my natural hair was a really big thing, going to interviews as a young person and, my people wanting to give me good advice about how to show up and make sure you get the job, and me being like, if they're not taking my authentic self, then I'm not going. So it was a lot of push and pull. of like me, which I think is just true for every generation. You're coming in, you have a new attitude, a new perspective, you want to express it, you're trying to make space. So that was like that moment in time of me being like, this is who I am, I'm trying to find my people. And through being loud and proud about who I was and what my opinions were, I was able to find a group of people that kind of like helped grow into my community. But I remember a lot of it at that point being like, what is this girl doing?
And I want to uplift that, because along these journeys too, part of it is still staying, where are friends and family in these movements, because they know you. They know you. They've raised you. So it's still a lot of love in there, even though it may be a lot of things to be understood. So in that also, where are you like as far as being young and in Detroit at this time, when so many young people leave Detroit? You're a young person that's like, I want to stay and be grounded in Detroit. What's the exchanges with your friends about saying like, nah, I'm staying here?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the majority of the friends that I was making were folks who were lifelong Detroiters, who were born and raised in Detroit. And so, yeah, like you said, I'm coming in, I'm like, Black people, my people here, there's so much for me to explore as a young person, because at this point, my experiences were all being in the backseat of my grandma or granddad's car or somebody else's car and being kind of chauffeured around versus I have a car, I have a job, what am I choosing to spend my time on, spend my money on? And so things were exciting for me that was not necessarily exciting for other people. It was kind of like relearning home and this version of home for me at that point. But I think some of that excitement and curiosity also rubbed off on the friends that I did have of like, isn't this dope? Like, I can't believe we're doing this, or, we're going to this place, I think I was able to bring that energy. I hope I was. And a lot of those folks still live here. A lot of those folks are lifelong Detroiters, but also folks that love Detroit, are committed to Detroit, rooted in Detroit, whether they come and go or not. So I think it was nice to be able to have a friends group that generally were folks that, were kind of able to tell me the honest experience of what it was like to be here and never be able to leave. But then, yeah, also just like have people to reintroduce me to home. So
I love it. Now, in this journey, now you're doing all this organizing. I know the natural next thing is people are like, you going to run for something? You going to run for something? You going to run for something? Politically, what's your thought process doing some political organizing, campaigning? Where's your mind at in reference to politics?
So yes, I got that question a lot, which like you said, like any young person starting off doing organizing work, you start speaking on panels, people like you speaking real good, speaking enough to have a platform. And it's like, so there was a moment where I had to decide like what type of trajectory did I want to have for myself. And, I was thinking about, for instance, doing a master's in public policy. And I was like, maybe I can be a part of this process from behind the scenes and contribute that way. I've always had a push about being a public figure. I think there's a different level of accountability that you invite by being a public figure in that way. There's less say so you have. There's a lot that you give by taking on a role like that.
Can you unpack that a little bit more?
What part?
Just why you see it as less say so and how much you're giving up of yourself.
Yeah. I think that while I do think that there's a role that folks who share our politics and share our values have to play by working within the system, there's compromises that are always going to have to be made by working within the system. And I don't think I would be able to operate in that and show up in my best way and have to make those sorts of compromises that come with taking a position like that. And it's not something that's not the role that I want to play. I don't think that that's the best way that I can show up. I come from a family of educators, so I mentioned my aunt. I have another aunt, V, who is also a DPS teacher. My mom teaches part-time. So for me, it was a part of meeting the points between what my interest, what my heart wants me to do, and what my community needs. And so for me, it felt like that intersection was around education, history, storytelling. It was something that felt like there's a need for, but also something that makes me like grow, like shine more, versus what I did experience as a young person who started having those experiences of going to Lansing for, policy day, or when I was a young person organizing with BYP, the National Lobby Day, and having to go and having to, tell people about your plans and what you want. And, later on hearing background conversations with, veteran organizers who are like, they're not even reading the policy. The people in the other part reading the policy. And then that doesn't matter because then the people are lobbying because Citizens United got passed. So we coming up against folks that are giving resources to these people's platforms. So honestly, some of it was also a lot of me having to disinvest what I thought would be the best mechanism for how to make a change that could feel that we could feel without us having to like beg for our humanity to be recognized and for people to like simply vote for something like clean water. Like having to be in that is like not the space that I want to be in. Like I don't want to be debating with folks about things that feel really foundational. I'm willing to do that in community because I feel a responsibility and a commitment. So I'm willing to have those sorts of discussions, but having it on a main stage with folks that are committed to not seeing us is not something that I want to do.
Thank you for sharing that. Beautiful, beautiful. And you eloquently delivered that so well. And when you talk about clean water, shout out to Mama Monica and everything and We the People that's grinding in that fight big time. But yes, it definitely takes it takes a lot to sit in that space knowing that some of those compromises will impact our people. And the challenge with the compromises that impact our people is back to the resources are already so scarce in our community. So anything impacting our people is everything impacting our people. So it's just, it takes the right disposition to be the person in that position. And I feel a lot like some of what you've echoed too. As we empower more of the community, we're empowering who's ever in that position to make more of the bold decisions that seem bold, that align with heightening our quality of life. All right, so history is storytelling and connecting to our people, which clearly Black Bottom Archives. How does it come about?
So yeah, I got connected to Black Bottom Archives through PG Watkins, who's one of the co-founders, along with Camille Johnson, who's also a co-founder. PG, after Mike Brown was murdered, there was a convening in Cleveland that was like before Movement for Black Lives was a thing and doing their national convenings. This was one of those moments where there were Black organizers from all over the country going and meeting for this weekend. And PG Watkins was one of those people who met Charlene Carruthers, who is one of the founders of BYP 100. They came back, they started a chapter. Well, they reached out to some Detroit organizers, young Black people. I met them. I got politically activated. We built a friendship. Through that work that I was doing, I was learning more and more about the importance of stories and organizing, and just this idea that it's not the numbers and the facts and the data that's actually moving people's hearts towards like seeing different perspectives. It's the actual stories. And so I wanted to figure out how I could contribute to that because it's something I enjoy. Like I can personally speak to the stories that I've heard, that I've read, that have moved my values to be more in alignment with, loving people, loving the world. I wanted to figure out how to contribute to that. So Black Bottom Archives, my first time ever seeing Black Bottom Archives was in an article. I think it was like an Ebony article, Ebony magazine, where, sometimes they do those little pull out spotlights, like a short little snippet and a picture. And it was a picture of PG Watkins and Camille Johnson. And I was like, these Black people look so dope. They had on all Black fits. And it was talked about as this platform at this time was a Tumblr platform, eventually became a website that was all about sharing and preserving Black Detroit history. So it started off as a digital blog where they just had folks, submitting essays and creative writings, all from Black Detroiters. when I talk to PG, I have a oral history plan with Camille Johnson coming up in the next week, which is dope to be able to have both founding perspectives, a part of how we understand our history. And so when I talked to PG, they mentioned how Camille and them at the time were in DC. They both were trying to pursue law school at the time. While they were in DC, they tell people they were from Detroit, and folks had a lot of negative feedback, negative reactions about what it means to be from Detroit, which is like, honestly, same thing I could say about when I was living in Jacksonville, which is wild to say because Florida is its own thing. Okay, but
yes. Florida ain't even different. It's another F word.
Okay,
that goes with the Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I got family there. I love Florida. It's if it wasn't so hot, but continue.
All that to say, like even telling people that I was from Detroit when I was living in Florida was like, oh my God, you from Detroit? Like I'm scared of you. Where you? Just those narratives. And excuse me. So they were also like coming across that and, also coming home and starting to see some of the new propaganda, the new ads. People might remember back then when they were bold enough to have like an ad on the side of a building and it was like all white faces talking about New Detroit.
Yep. I remember that. Karen Dumas wrote a column about that. It was the opening. I forget the restaurant that's right there at the corner. But before then, in Bedrock Properties, many Bedrock Properties had their, what is that? The stock photography of people hanging out in downtown and not a black face to be found.
None. So, they were experiencing, people's negative stereotypes. They were experiencing being erased from, the history of the city, the future of the city. And so they wanted to make a platform for folks to come together at a time where a lot of the media that was being generated wasn't being created by us and wasn't being reflective of our experiences. And so that was a really radical thing for them to do as young people who, at the time, I asked PG, I was like, why did you call yourselves an archive? Like, I personally did not learn about archives until I was at Marygrove and I had to write a paper. Archives were not a thing that I was familiar with. And the way that people think about archives, even when they learn about them, is not a Tumblr page or a digital publication. So they were like way ahead of their times in terms of understanding that they were building an archive, that 10 years later, we have original perspectives and podcasts and writings that were generated by this group of young people who existed at a time where Detroit was going through these major changes. There's a narrative culture war happening that still is happening now, but it was a much different playing field then, and they were trying to make an impact.
Definitely. Camille and PG. PG, Camille, amazing at what they were doing, what she was doing, the connections and the creativity already. PG's organizing through the Bog Center and connecting to so many other people that they have connected to. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. And then Camille, definitely daughter of Donna from ECN, and a love for so much of Black people and Black stories to connect on both. That founding and that foundation, you're captured in that and like, okay, this is dope. So when do you meet them? When do you say, I got to get involved? And how do you get involved?
Yeah, so I meet PG through BYP 100. It was organization made up of 18 to 35-year-olds organizing for an abolitionist future through a Black queer feminist lens. So it was a very specific group of folks who came together. And I met PG, who, Black Bottom Archives was starting at that time. Like, movement was kind of like escalating around 2015. And then, BYP 100 was founded. So it was just a mixing pot of things. PG and I developed a really close relationship. That's one of my closest friends today. And around 2017, I started thinking more about how I wanted to further my education. Like, I come from a family of educators, so when I told them that I wasn't going back to school immediately after graduating, everybody was on my neck. Like, is she ever going back? Like,
hilarious.
Is this it? And so I was doing a lot of thinking, and I am a forever student, so I knew I wanted to go back and study something else. And I came across like archiving and found this program at the University of Texas at Austin that allowed me to do a dual master's in women's and gender studies and a master's in information science. And my perspective with going into this program is like, what skills can I learn that can help me archive my community stories? I shout out to Irma Henderson, who is the reason why I know about an archive. I had the opportunity to write a capstone paper about something related to Detroit history, and I chose to write it about Irma Henderson.
Wait, I gotta put a pin in that. Mama Irma Henderson and the Women's Council. So my godmothers, Joanne Watson and Orthea Barnes, were like so many Black women throughout the 80s and 70s and the 90s of Detroit, impacted by Irma Henderson and her Women's Council that she continually poured into so many other women. And it was kind of a baton passing where I'm meeting all these other women that would come to the city of Detroit through my connection to Mama Barnes and Mama Watson, kind of. So that is, I mean, this past weekend seeing Kim Trent, and she was like one of the little homies at the time connected in this group, and my auntie Helen Love. You know, we're thinking about just a visionary of leadership, period. You know, so to say women in leadership, if people are like looking to separate it, I think it diminishes so much of the impact of everything that Irma Henderson was doing. When you look at our Detroit City Charter, the only other person and a disciple of her that has almost just as much in ordinances would be a Mama Watson, and also running with her, Mary Ann Mahaffey, that was in that same mix. So like Irma Henderson really set so much up for how we would look at like a vision of Detroit moving forward. Man, I want to read your dissertation, but just that connection, that is wonderful and beautiful of someone to select in it. And I just want to frame that so people get this framing of, you know, Coleman Young's often and rightfully so uplifted, but even in that same community, you know, as Detroiters are bringing Paul Robeson to speak in Detroit, it's Mama Henderson really kind of laying out the path of like, all right, Coleman, you can move this way, you can move that way. Like very, very intrinsically involved with so much of how we see in the city of Detroit. So that's all. I just want to
say that.
I want to uplift that.
Thank you. Because I be doing it all the time. All the time. And it is so wild to me as I've continued to learn more that there's so many people that don't know about Irma Henderson. I had somebody tell me that they attended Irma Henderson Academy and they didn't understand who Irma Henderson was. And this is not any shame to them at all. This is just another one of those things where it's a resource thing. Like, this is not an investment made. There's not a real investment in telling Black stories overall. And so the same could be said in Detroit. So I don't think it's our fault why we don't know these stories, but it is very like, oh my goodness, how could we not talk about Irma Henderson? How can't we not talk about the Black radical tradition in Detroit and think about Irma Henderson? And I just started working at the Ruther Archives, and so I've been able to have access to some of her records and finding photos of her doing anti-apartheid work and journals about her traveling to South Africa and helping to deliver a baby, and, you know, just all these radical politics that are radical to us now were even more radical then in certain ways. So to know that this Black woman was boldly like speaking her politics and living her politics in that time frame is really exciting and inspiring to me. And so it was that as a young person, some of her papers are at the Ruther and some of them are at the Burton Historical Collection, the City Archive. So my first experience was at the City Archive, like looking through her notebooks, learning that she attended Wayne State. She also was a social worker. So like I was finding a lot of linkages. And at that time, I was looking for Black women that I could see as examples of what I wanted to be. So it was really beautiful to learn her story. But what I will say is kind of a roundabout of what even brought me to knowing about her, because She wasn't somebody that was taught to me in any Detroit class. And I've taken Detroit classes. And I recently came up in contact with a student who said they took a Black Detroit Studies course and didn't learn about Irma Henderson. So all that to say, like, that's a perpetual gap in history that is still happening where she's not being spoken of as part of our Black radical tradition here. But looking at her, the reason why I found out about her was because my research question was I wanted to learn about Black communist women organizing, like in the 60s and the 70s. I wanted to see like what was that landscape like. And what I didn't understand at that point is like how much of a gap in records that there are around Black history, and how easily it is to say that because we can't find that photo of that person or that document or that book or the, whatever item, that then that person never actually existed. And so for me, it just wasn't enough to say that because I'm not able to find that exact marker, that politic, that version of woman that I was looking for, that I wanted to be able to study and learn more from, didn't exist. So kind of in a roundabout way, it took me to Irma Henderson, who didn't necessarily self-identify as a communist, but she was curious. I know that she took a trip, for instance, to like the Soviet Union and like just wanted to understand how they thought about land. You don't have to be, and what I've learned like as an organizer is that it's less important how you self-identify and more important how you practice your values. And so I was looking for values like people, and that's how I kind of came across Irma Henderson.
One sec. I want you to repeat that one again, because now it's like that's a quote that I gotta put in mind. Repeat that again and unpack a little bit how you got to that. Unpack that again.
What part?
Your quote, man.
It's less important to me how you identify and more important how you practice your values. Is it that? Yeah. Because, I mean, all skin folk ain't kinfolk, and there's a lot of people that can self-identify and say they are who they are, but I need to see how you practice to understand if we're actually talking the same language and working towards the same vision, because people have their own interpretations of all sorts of things. So what it means to you to be a feminist might not mean the same thing. And so you kind of have to find your people. And the way you do that is through understanding and keeping study of their actions and how they're actually moving. So for me, and I wrote my thesis about like Mama Monica and Mama Charity and Mama Lila.
Rest in peace.
I wrote about for my dissertation, my thesis. And when I went to Texas, I was writing about Black women who do water justice work. And I was talking about how I saw them embodying Black feminist principles. And none of them really identify as Black feminists. But for me, this idea that they were willing to take up space and hold leadership in this way, using their lived experiences as pieces of information. Like the data came after their experiences. The data about the water came after the people made the observations and understood that there was an issue in their community. For me, a lot of that is what I've learned about Black feminism. Is like this understanding of like our lived experience is a wealth of knowledge on its own. So I'm always just like willing to, and also understanding that language changes over time. And so like, like maybe I wouldn't call myself a feminist in like the 1940s, but maybe I would in a different version. I don't know. I could be kind of going off, but all that to say, I'm always more invested in finding people that are aligned in actions and what I see their actions working towards in terms of a vision, than us saying, we're both people who believe in Black liberation. How do you practice that? Because it might look a little bit different, and like it might not be actually that. So
definitely, as you uplift that, it's so rich of an experience. And now I'm about to do one of those classic Kari diatribes where it's like, Kari, be talking more than the guests. Yes, sometimes I do. Sometimes I do.
You got to say what's on your heart.
I know. So I'm not a historian and I'm not a journalist. I create content from the lens of storytelling. A lot of these exchanges, and I'm not necessarily going back and verifying if your great grandmother comes from Mississippi either. What I've gathered over these 10 years is a lot of discussions in my memory, I got things that kind of go and connect. It's instances that stick out in my mind because I'm still that little kid in the back of the car asking 1,000,001 questions. I'm just an adult now. So some of those questions, I have other things to feed into. So when I say walking the alligator down the street in Jacksonville, I'm not speaking from a lens of that's something I think that's doing. I'm speaking because I got a cousin that do that. Right? You know what I'm saying? So it's layered. I'm understanding some of the lens of this. And as you say, back to the action, because oftentimes it will be the historian, the journalist, whoever the writer is, or possibly me, the person that's creating content about it, that has a person frame the reference in which how we're looking at why a person did this, quote unquote. And what I found through a lot of these discussions that I've had with people, it's definitely not as much of, it's not as black and white as we think. It's a lot of gray area into a lot of the organizing.
Yeah.
So Mama Henderson, as I know, back to like these oral traditions, have these stories of one of the brothers of his day that was a hell of a athlete, singer, writer, actor, Paul Robeson, and a leader throughout the black community. And he would go from different cities to different cities, galvanizing support. He was supported from the lens of a lot of Russians or Soviets at the time. So it aligned in communism, but it was more so giving food to the people. So the communist values, like, do I think that everybody in Black Bottom Detroit was reading, Lenin and could give the perspective of what? No, not at all. Just, I don't think so. They saw access to food. They saw access to opportunity. They saw a black man being honored with statues. And we connect with this black man as a leader in our society. And that relationship continues to grow with so many other people too. So even, Kwame Ture and others, like, I don't necessarily think it's as deep for certain people. The anti-apartheid movement that you speak of, that many Detroiters put a lot of effort into. When people say, like, why is Mandela coming to Detroit so soon? It's because the relationships already exist with Congressman Conyers and, still around, Baba Charles Simmons and Mama Henderson and Aisha Shule, Mama Imani Humphrey. Like, the anti-apartheid movement in Detroit was very vast. The same way that Detroit was sending so much money down south during the Montgomery bus boycott, we were sending a lot of money to South Africa the same way. So, like, these relationships that I get through oral traditions, and then I can interview somebody and they say, yeah, we was throwing apartheid parties. So we get some money and then we send some money over there. Like, this was commonplace in the 80s in Detroit.
Yeah.
So that conveys where Mandela is, I don't even like the term freed, but for lack of a better term, freed. And he's coming to Tiger Stadium at the time for one of the biggest rallies in a tour of freedom that he has. And he made a point of saying, I want to get to Detroit. And it's not just because of Motown Records. Now, and this is no offense to the News of Free Press story, they're going to write it like, oh, he just liked the Temptations, which I'm not saying he didn't like the Temptations. What I'm saying is it was relationships that were built over time. The Damon Keefs, and so many others, that talk about that. So just the layers in these relationships through, and I'm not triangulating because that's often what the science is to it, meaning like you got to have like 3 different sources that all kind of come together and justify why this happened. And I still say that I call cap on a lot of that stuff because clearly did 3 sources come together to justify psychology saying that black people are not human beings and apes? It's a moving target.
Right.
So.
Yeah, but the relationships are rich, like I think that's something I've always been interested in is, um, this question of like, who are your people? And like your answer to that, it can be your family, but it also, through being in community, you become a part of all of these other lineages of people that have shaped you in some form, whether that be through you having, literal interactions with them or through reading and learning about their lives and finding things about their story that you resonate with. And yeah, I'm always interested in documenting lineages, documenting our relationships to each other, the ways that our relationships to each other have been the things that have brought us closer to liberation, that have brought us closer to, safety and providing for ourselves. Um, when I think about that, I think about Black Bottom naturally. Um, which bringing us back to Black Bottom, because I know I took a whole detour, but I had to take the detour to get to the point, okay?
I like it.
Which is to say, I also had an experience working at the Arab American National Museum. Shout out to them. I had an oral history, did my first oral history project with them on a project that was centered around immigration, migration, and displacement. So I was talking to folks in Southwest. I was talking to folks in Dearborn. I was talking to Black Detroiters and just hearing different perspectives of how their lives fit into these themes around immigration, migration, and displacement. That was my first time ever doing an oral history. And for me, I just naturally started to think about, while also I'm organizing at this time, how can I use these skills in my community? How can I make sure that the stories of the folks that I'm organizing with today don't go overlooked, aren't erased, aren't ignored, like the impact that we're making today? How do I make sure that we're on record, this moment is on record? And so that question brought me to thinking about going to school for archiving and figuring out what are these tools and techniques that they're using behind these really big buildings to make sure that these things are preserved and accessible for future generations. And how can I retool that and use that as tools in my community in all different, sorts of realms. For me, my community generally is Black people, but I have a specific commitment to Black Detroiters, to Black folks that are, contributing to the Black radical tradition. So for me, I was like, how can I bring these skills back to these communities and my family, of course, and figure out like how I can be of service of making sure that our things are preserved, that they're available. And so as I was doing that, I was in conversation with PG from the start. Like, I'm coming back to Detroit. I'm bringing it back to BBA. We about to, do something. And so I continued to live a life where I was coming back to Detroit over the summer. And partially I was doing that to work on my thesis, which my original thesis idea, I've had a couple of thesis ideas, but my second original was I wanted to write about Mama Charity. I wanted to write about Charity Hicks.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. I met Charity when I was a young person at EMEAC.
EMEAC, I was going to say that, yeah.
And, Charity is a powerhouse. I mean, in all ways. And I got to kind of get a different viewpoint. I met her as a young person, and I didn't get to have the like truly one-on-one experience of being mentored by her because her life was taken. But like one of the last things she said to me, it was like during the MLK like annual service event, we were at the church, and she was like, send me your resume. I'm about to get your resume together. We about to get you active, which is like the usual reaction you get when you're a young person in organizing spaces. Everybody wants to have a touch of like making sure that you stay values aligned, making sure that you're developed. So she was one of many people who wanted to touch me and help guide me on this path. And so I've always been really interested in making sure that her legacy is shared and talked about in the same way that I feel about, Mama Irma Henderson. And so I came to EMEAC. I was looking through her papers and starting to kind of like archive her things. I didn't know where to take it. I didn't feel like I had what I needed at that point to do that work solely. But then I also started to think about, I would be telling an incomplete story of talking about her in isolation to the people that surround her, that she influences, that influence her. And so to me, it felt more important to document her in relationship to these other Black women, as I saw being really impactful around the water justice movement in Detroit. So I met with Mama Lila, and she gave me this list.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. She gave me this piece, a note, a list of these Black women that she thought I should talk to. who could give me a piece of history around the water justice movement. So I wasn't able to talk to all of them individually. Peter Blackmer, who was doing a project called Voices from the Grassroots, was collecting oral histories from like Black movement folks in the city. And so he was doing it at the same time that I was writing my thesis. So he actually allowed me to use some of those oral histories.
Cool.
He also adjusted some of his questions to, interview folks when I wasn't able to be here because I was still commuting. But yeah, I was able to write my thesis. I talked to Mama Rhonda Anderson. I didn't get to talk to Alice Jennings, but, got to be able to use her oral history. Marion Kramer, talked about Mama Joanne Watson. I feel like I'm missing somebody on this list, but the list goes on.
A lot of the OGs.
A lot of the OGs. And that work kept bringing me back, but then also the work with BBA. So PG and I started talking about in 2017 what it could look like to have a digital map that tells the story of Black Bottom. Technology has changed so much over this past decade. So this was really, really radical for us to be trying to talk about at that moment in 2017 because the tech was just not quite where it is now. But at that time, we were still thinking about like, how can we, bring more texture to understanding the scope of the businesses and homes and the people who lived and made Black Bottom and Paradise Valley places that Black Detroiters still hold tightly on to today. And so we were like, let's use some new tech to just like make it more exciting and just find new ways to tell this story. So I did some initial consulting about our first version of our digital map that maps some of the businesses that existed in Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. And then PG had started to do some more oral history collection because Black Bottom Archives originally was not founded as an archive that was, necessarily dedicated to
Black
Bottom. But how I feel about it is it became our responsibility when we chose to name ourselves as Black Bottom Archives, is that we have a responsibility to make sure that that story is preserved and shared. And so that has just been reflective of what our work has looked like in the most recent years, which is that as community comes in contact with us, they're like, yeah, I want to hear about, the preserving, sharing Detroit stories, but what about Black Bottom? What about Paradise Valley? So we've always been trying to find more creative ways to tell that story. Like our oral traditions serve a role. And also we have to meet young people where they are today and they're on the internet. And we're on the internet because like at this point, we're also still young people. We're just younger people, you know. So we wanted to make tools and find creative ways to do that. So I did some consulting on that in 2017 and that officially launched in 2019. And then in 2019, PG and I worked together to create our Summer Youth Archival Fellowship. So I helped make the curriculum for that. We had a group of 5 Black Detroit youth who had the assignment of doing their own oral history project. And so in preparation for that, we took them to some like cultural institutions. We did some trainings about archival skills, oral history skills. And then they kind of completed that by doing their own oral history project. They presented it to community. And that was really like one of my first experiences of being able to do what I said I wanted to do, which was to go and learn skills and find a way to reinterpret it and retool it to make it useful to the community that I was a part of. And that work, we were supposed to relaunch it again in 2020.
Good old COVID.
The pandemic, kicked off, but here we are again in 2025 and we're not relaunching that exact thing. We've like reimagined it and now are, launching a program called Preserving Black Legacy. And so this is a year-long fellowship that's open to an intergenerational group of Black Detroiters who are also going to be doing an oral history project, but based around their neighborhood and making a digital exhibit that tells a story about their neighborhood. So, never too late, right on time.
You got that right.
Yeah. So
I love it. Oh, man. I love the story. And just knowing that this will be archived.
Yes.
It adds layers because as you all see, I love long form content, though a lot of you all now are more so clamoring to my 1.5-minute clips. And that's more power to you. But long form, I feel you get the richness and you get the context. Hence, that's where the archive matters. Like, I love reading. One of my biggest hobbies, I collect old magazines because it's more than, I know that this is a journalistic lens, but like an old Ebony, an old Jet, even Time magazine, and just the tone of the way that it's spoke about, especially if you get quotes from people, it captures something in time to help layer the context of some of the other things that are happening simultaneously.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point, is like, you know, people like the 1 minute, 1.5 minute clip because it's convenient. And like, we're moving more into a convenient society, just like as a result of capitalism. And like, we need to intervene in that. And the way to intervene in that isn't necessarily to be like, let me throw this long form thing at you and like, expect you to do it. But like, how do we meet people where they're at and like start to kind of like stimulate a taste for more, which I think is like one of the most exciting things about archiving for me, is that when people go to an archive, you go in with a question and you come out maybe not knowing the answer, but knowing a whole lot about a whole bunch of other different things that are related, that start to kind of generate a curiosity to bring you back, and maybe not bring you back, but take your search somewhere else where you didn't necessarily think. So for me, that's always how I'm trying to think about our learning experiences for folks that we're offering, is like, how am I sparking that curiosity for you to want to learn more? And maybe it means coming back to us, or maybe that means, exploring a different question that you're curious about, but just making people staying curious about learning, and learning as like a opportunity and not like a responsibility. It's not a burden to learn.
That, and even the value.
Right.
So if you're one to say that we just need to focus on now and the future, then we have to step back and say, why does the Vatican care so much about all this stuff from the past?
Right.
Why do archives have so much value themselves?
Right.
Even the archive of, I was working there for years, but a lot of the archive of the Michigan Citizen, the University of Michigan, took a lot of interest in that. The archives, if you want to check Detroit News or the Detroit Free Press, you're going to pay a lot of money to look back at a story from back in the day. If you want, the Burton Collection is an amazing asset for us as Detroiters to tap into, that I like to go to. When I found out about it, you just, to like go there. Or even King's Books. Like, I have from King's Books, I have the proposal for the development that became Harbortown. So it's less about, do I care about what Harbortown is going to become, as much as like the vision in which, how it is planned. Just some of these other books and magazines and thought process of, okay, when this happens and that happens, because the planning and development just kind of goes back into, other things in policy. The planning and development for what will happen in the future is usually planned 30 years ago.
Right.
And as we start seeing it as people, we're shifted in different ways. Then it starts making sense. So it's like, okay, no more incinerator. We're going to put a jail over here. Things like that.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's like, we're like, yeah, no more incinerator. But it's like, nah, don't lock us up, But these are plans that, and everything's not like, I don't think it's like a villain from like a cartoon or something that's like making these insidious plans and things like that. But there are a lot of ideas in place about what will happen, and to just look at them and how they manifest. Who are these people that were a part of some of these things that do change? It gives, back to you say, understanding of the action, which at the root of all of this with Detroit is Different is sparking critical thought.
Exactly. Yeah. And one thing I want to say about, like, if, whoever isn't sold about archives, again, like, we do have to be observant about, what our opposition sees value in, and they show us what they see value in by what they choose to defund. And right now, like, we're seeing a mass defunding of archives and libraries. I mean, they're like tearing things apart right now. And so if our stories didn't actually mean anything, it wouldn't even be worth the effort of, institutions that aren't even necessarily making any explicit community to be responsible to the communities that they're preserving. They just are existing. Our institutions that are under attack and that are doing some of the work of sharing and preserving our stories are now being erased. So like even what it means for us to be able to maintain hold over our things and understand the importance of records and what it means to hold people accountable. Because like you said, right, the incinerator was torn down with this plan of putting a jail there. Like it's important to tell the story of who all was a part of all of these decisions that were made that got us to those points, because it's so easily shifted to be the person who made the problem also becomes the person who's the solutionary. And then the records play a role in keeping us accountable to understanding the full story of what happened and who all played a part and who's profiting from the things.
Very, very much so. Very, very much so. And I can't agree more. And I often would say that it's a luxury to sit back and really, dive deep into a lot of these challenges.
Mm-hmm.
But that luxury is something that I think as the community organizing is a big key that I'm recognizing. It's not a lot of resources there for that online. So I want to uplift a little bit more about that because we're doing it no matter what.
Right.
It's just, what are the skill sets? How do we tap in? How do we become more intergenerational? How does this all connect? Becomes more of an impetus moving forward, I believe. And Detroit's one of those places to take it. So with that being said, what projects, how do people get to Black Bottom Archive? How do they connect?
Yeah. So Black Bottom Archives, this is our 10-year anniversary. This is a big anniversary for us. We have a new logo now, which, has the like Sankofa imagery there. So really trying to embody going back and getting it, understanding how foundational Black Bottom has been to our work. And wanting to now move into making sure that we are actively preserving the neighborhoods that are being changed today, and being in practice of our commitment to sharing and preserving Black Detroit stories to the fullest. So this is a year of celebrating that anniversary with the Black Bottom Street View exhibit being the farthest it's ever been from Detroit in Lansing at the Michigan History Center. It's going to be up there until November. And that exhibit has a few of the blocks pictured, but it also has wall panels for the first time that gives some more storytelling about Black Bottom, why it is so important to Black Detroiters, why it was destroyed, who were the folks responsible, and what impact that still has on Black Detroiters today, which is something that we've been exploring for the past 2 years in response to this 375 project of trying to make sure that those folks, the people who were impacted, their descendants, and even the folks who feel kind of like the aftershock effects. Because when you're talking about removing cultural institutions and businesses, it's not just the people who lived in those communities that are impacted, but Black people all over the place who were coming to Detroit to experience this culture in this place that doesn't exist. So it gives a little bit of like what we've been learning from our Sankofa research project through the oral histories. And then that's a big thing for us. Our opening is going to be April 5th, which is a Saturday. And then we also have our Detroit, our 10-year exhibit that is at the Detroit Historical Museum that just tells the trajectory of our organization from starting as a Tumblr page to eventually, having a podcast and a book club and a digital publication to today having a digital archive, having this exhibit, doing the programs and workshops we do. And to now moving into launching this fellowship that we hope will be something that we can launch continuously, of making sure that Black Detroiter stories are, the important places that are important to us, that are changing every day, regardless of if we want them to or not, that essence, that legacy isn't lost in the way that a lot of folks have felt it has been for Black Bottom and Paradise Valley.
I'm with it. I love it. Now I got to hit you with the classic questions. Very first car, year, make, and model, year you got it.
I had a 2004 Focus.
Okay.
White.
Okay.
I got it when I was 17.
Okay.
Yep, it was my mom's car. My mom was a mechanic for a little bit. She worked at what's one of the AutoZone. She worked at AutoZone. And she kept that car up, and I kept that car up. The only reason that car brought me to Detroit. I have pictures of it. It had zebra print seats on the inside. I had the little zebra print dice for a period of time.
What was the name of this vehicle?
I think it might have been Rosemary, which is really funny.
Hilarious.
But I love that car, and I still have a Ford Focus today. Ford has done me well. I'm not even gonna lie.
Okay, all right. Where's the first place you went when you got it?
Olive Garden.
Ah, there you go. Breadsticks. Okay.
Yes.
All right. You're the DJ at the end of the fireworks, Woodward and Jefferson. You get to play 2 songs. What songs you playing?
Okay, so this is when the grandparents part starts showing out, because I'm not gonna lie, I kind of want to play a Kim song.
Hilarious. See, I told you. What I tell you about it's like throw on that Mahalia Jackson. It's like, what?
We need to come into a vibe after the fireworks. Let's bring us down. Let's bring it down a little bit. Yeah, I don't know if I would stand on this answer when I leave, but in this moment right now, I want to play Kim Love Calls.
Okay, that's one. And what else?
And I'm going to just go with, like, what's that song? The Tamia Hustle song.
Okay.
What's the song?
I don't even know that it's the Tamia
Can't Get
Hustle
Enough
song.
of You. Can't Get Enough of You by Tamia.
They should change that to the Tamia Hustle
They
song.
They should. I would play that one first so that we could all come together in a joint spirit of dance. And then I would leave with Love Calls, because hopefully we leave with love.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mellow people out. I'm with it. You said this is my grandparent coming in.
Yep.
With it.
Yeah.
With it. Like I say, I'm a grandparent's kid. People be wondering why I like that old gospel.
Mm-hmm. And why you cook so good.
That too. Very true. Very true. All right, last question. You could rename Woodward after one Detroiter. Who would it be and why?
You know what? I've said her name enough. I'm going to name it after Irma Henderson.
There we go.
I'm going to name it after Irma Henderson. She's made enough impact. We are benefiting from a lot of her, the leaders that she's been able to develop, the impact that she's been able to have, the gatherings that she's made for people to make connections and do the work that she does, that they're doing right now. I'd give her flowers. Name Woodward Henderson.
I love it. Great interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Definitely. Peace.
Detroit is different. Detroit is different.